back to Love Your Food. This week we are doing potato gnocchi, and we're going to be doing that with a tomato sauce with some blue cheese, and we're going to be basing our tomato sauce off of the tomato soup that we've done in a previous recipe, and I'll link that recipe in a card and probably also in the description below. And let's go with our ingredients. So we're going to be using some potatoes. You want some sort of baking potatoes for this. Some flour, a shallot. We're going to use some dried basil, a little bit of parsley, that's sort of optional for your garnish at the end, some blue cheese, the tomato soup, and we're going to add a little bit of Marsala wine to this as well. So we're going to start off by making the gnocchi. So the first thing we need to do is boil our potatoes. So we want to cook these, we're going to boil these until they're just about cooked. Now's a great time to add a little bit of flavor into things. So we're going to get this going on our induction burner. We're going to salt the water. We're also going to add some black peppercorns. We're going to add 1 dried chili pepper. And we're also going to add bay leaf to this as well. And that's just to add a little bit of flavor to your potatoes as they're boiling. This is completely optional. You do want to salt the water for sure, but any other flavorings in there are completely optional. So we just wanted to add a little bit of extra flavor in there as we're starting, and that will add flavor as those potatoes boil in that nice water. So after they have boiled for a little while, you can see the water has actually gone down quite a bit. We are going to see if these are ready, and we're just going to use the usual fork test for this. So we're going to stick a fork in them. That one is still a little bit firm. You can see the fork goes in a little bit, but not very far. The other one, the fork goes in a lot easier, a lot deeper, so that one's probably done. Now, if you have 2 different size potatoes or one that's fresher than the other and they cook at different times, that's just fine. We need to wait until they're cool enough to handle at least before we turn them into gnocchi. So what we can do is take one of them out now, and what we're going to do before we deal with them is we're going to get them dried off. So we're going to take the one that's done, and we're going to pop that into cast iron, and you can see our cast iron's hot. We're just going to pop that in the oven just for a couple of minutes until it's good and dried out. So all the extra liquid off of the outside is gone. And once that's done for both of them, once they're both cooked all the way through, and they've both been dried off in the oven and they're cooked, now we can finish processing them. So the skin should come off pretty easily once you get to this point. So we're just going to peel that skin off. And you can see it comes off in these nice big strips. Super easy to peel once they're cooked like this. And we're also going to get rid of any little discolorations. We want our gnocchi to be a good consistent color, and we don't want the little eyes in there as well. So we're just going to cut all of those out with a butter knife is usually just fine for this once they're cooked. And then, of course, we want to make this into gnocchi, so we're going to be mashing them together. Now, we're going to run this through a strainer. If you have a potato ricer, that's ideal for this. We don't have that tool, so if you don't have a ricer, you can use just a strainer like this. So you just want to cut your potato up and put it in there. This is why we need to wait until it's cool enough to use. You don't want them to be cold, though. You don't want these to rest for too long. You want to be able to process them fresh. And you can see here, we're just going to push this through the strainer, and you get that really nice, light and fluffy potato texture out the other side, and it'll help to make a really nice, smooth gnocchi. So we're just going to push all of that through both of those potatoes. And then you want to make sure that you are scraping the bottom of your strainer off as well, because that's a lot of potato that's stuck to the bottom. And just make sure that you've got all of it in your bowl there. Now, there are some recipes for gnocchi that use egg in it and some that don't. Ours do not. So they are vegan, actually. They're just made with potatoes and flour. So this is a recipe that you can use if you want to keep it vegan. There's no meat or meat byproducts in here at all. And it's if you have a vegan sauce as well, you can have a completely vegan meal. That's an easy thing to do with this recipe. So we're just going to add some flour, and we're just going to mix this together until it starts to come together. You can see here it's pulling away from the sides, and it's going to start to make a dough. Now, the amount of flour you have to add to this is going to change based on how wet the potatoes are, how dry your flour is. It's going to be, it may even depend on how humid it is where you live. So it's really going to depend. We're going to give you, of course, as rough an estimate as we can in the description below, but it's kind of a thing you have to go by feel and decide whether or not the texture is right when you get to where it's supposed to be. So we're going to take part of this and roll it into just a long skinny tube, and we're going to cut this into individual pieces. So a little bit of flour on our cutting board. You can pull it apart, but it makes it harder to have even pieces. So we actually recommend using a knife and just cutting it into individual gnocchi. We're just going to cut it down the whole length. You want to get, roughly the same size for each piece, of course. And then just give it a little push with the fork. If you've done this correctly, it should sort of bounce off the end of the fork. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's kind of cool how it does it and folds it in half a little bit. You get that nice texture. So we're just going to let those rest for a little while and start going on the sauce while we're waiting for our water to boil for the gnocchi. So for the sauce, we're going to start off with the shallot. We're just going to slice that and actually dice it kind of fine and get that into a pan with a little bit of melted butter. And once that is going, we're going to add our dried basil to this, just to perk it up a little bit while the shallots are sweating in there. And then we're going to add in our tomato soup. So this is the same as our tomato cream soup that we made on the channel quite a while ago. It's a super simple recipe and works very, very well in this recipe as well. It's got a really nice rich flavor. It kind of turns it into a tomato rosé sauce. And as I said earlier, we're going to add a little bit of Marsala wine to this. And if you want to spice this up with a little bit of Tabasco sauce or something like that as well, you can add that in. It's a very versatile sauce. It's very, very simple. You do need a little bit of acid in there. So the Marsala, a little bit of vermouth would work very well. As I said, Tabasco sauce works just fine. We're just going to stir that together, make sure everything is well combined. And we want to reduce this because we want it to thicken a little bit before we use it on our gnocchi. So we're just going to let that sit for a little while, and meanwhile we have a nice hot pot full of boiling water all the way up to a rolling boil. We're just going to toss our gnocchi in. And we're just going to show you the entire process of cooking these because it doesn't take very long, and it's really important that you keep a very close eye on these. You don't want to overcook them because they'll sort of merge together into one big gloopy mess. So you want to make sure you're keeping a pretty good eye on them. When they first go in the water, they are going to sink. And then when they are all floating, that's about the time when they're done. So they're going to go through this cooking process. And once they all start floating together, that's when it's time to take them out and let them drain and set them aside for the sauce. So you can see them in there. They're still near the bottom. The ones that we added in first are starting to come up to the top at this point. That boiling water still at that nice rolling boil. Another good indication that you've done it right is you're not going to see a whole lot of little bits of potato floating around in your water. That's a good indication that you may not have added enough flour or that you didn't work the dough enough. You do need to have a little bit of work in there so that they stick together, but not stick to each other. But here you see they're sort of remaining individual, they're not breaking apart or anything like that. That's just about right. And you can see they're all starting to come up to the top at this point, so they're getting really close to being ready. You do need to make sure that they're cooked all the way through. You don't want to have raw flour or anything in there. It ruins the taste and is not particularly good for you to be eating raw flour. So now they're all right up at the top. That water is still boiling strong, and it's just about time to take these out because they look just about done. You don't want to see them swell up too much. They're going to puff up a little bit for sure, but you don't want to see them swell up and become kind of waterlogged. And there you go. You see they're still a little bit springy. They're beautiful and tender. We're just going to scoop these out with a strainer. And that's just about perfect. So we're going to get all those out of the water. And you see how short that was. It was really, really quick to get all of them from made to cooked very, very fast. So those are cooked. We're going to put them in the casserole dish. And meanwhile, we're going to finish off our sauce. So here's our blue cheese. We're going to add a little bit. We're going to crumble it and add it to the sauce. We're also going to top it with a little bit of blue cheese as well. You can crumble this with a fork. You can, if you have a knife, you can on hand at the moment, you can just chop it up with a knife. This part is going to be added into the sauce, so it doesn't really matter about how it looks. And we want this to sort of integrate a little bit. So we're going to toss that in and stir it around just to let some of the smaller pieces melt completely and some of the bigger pieces get really, really soft. Just give it a nice stir to make sure that it all gets integrated nicely. And you can see the sauce has thickened up quite a lot. We've let it sit on the element on a sort of medium-low heat for quite some time. Great time to taste and make sure that everything is tasting good together. And you can adjust flavors at that point if you need to. Ours was great, so we're just going to pop that right over top of the gnocchi. And once you've got that on there, we are going to top it off with just a little bit more of that beautiful blue cheese. You can also use a little bit of Parmesan at this point, if you prefer. We're just going to crumble a little bit more of that blue cheese on top here. And then this is going to go under the broiler for just a short little period of time. We don't want to, of course, overcook it. We don't want anything to burn, but we do want to get some of that blue cheese on top melted and maybe a little bit of browning as well. So that's ready to go into the oven now. We're just going to pop that under, as I said, the broiler for a little while. And it doesn't take very long before it's just a few minutes, and all of that blue cheese has really nicely melted. As I said, some of it has browned a little bit. That tomato sauce has got a little bit of crispy edge around the outside. Just fantastic. Really, really delicious. And from there, you're just going to serve that. It's got those nice, big, tender, fluffy gnocchi in that sauce. You got the blue cheese and that kind of rosé tomato sauce, which is fantastic. And we serve this with a little bit of steak, a salad. Fantastic, really, really easy to do, and absolutely delicious. We hope you'll give this one a try and enjoy. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.